Saludos. I am Jacinto Ramos Jr., better known in some parts as Cinto. It has been an honor to serve as CUBE's chair the last 2 years. I got to give a lot of love to the NSBA crew and our family, the CUBE Steering Committee. I want to take a second to welcome our ancestors into this space and honor them. One of our beloved steering committee members, Mrs. Martha Wilson, passed away this year. She has now crossed over and become an ancestor. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor her, as well as our colleagues that have transitioned this year. Thank you. When I first attended a CUBE conference back in 2014, I knew I had found a home. As a new trustee, I really had no idea what a trustee could or could not do. I ran in my hood to represent young people, the students. My lens was from a youth minister at my Catholic church, a parent, a juvenile probation officer, and a gang interventionist. What I knew to be true was schools were failing my young people in my community. Board politics and adult agendas were the primary focus, and the casualties were evident by the number of young people incarcerated, pushed out of our school systems, and even worse, in coffins. CUBE spoke to these topics and did so unapologetically. I come to you today virtually due to COVID-19. It is no joke. We will probably agree it has taken a toll on our communities of color and families in financial poverty. It is further exposing what we already knew. Our students and families are lacking the proper resources to withstand a worldwide pandemic. Many lack the basic necessities, such as access to medical coverage and a steady income without having to be the essential workers on the front lines. We know the digital divide is real. We know that internet is now as essential as utilities, and we can come to the conclusion that public education systems have been seriously underfunded. As if the pandemic wasn't testing our will enough. Police brutality, or should I say, the killing of black people in our streets, has pushed our nation to a breaking point. We are being forced by young people and conscious human beings to choose if we will be anti-racist or racist. There is no middle ground. The social construct of race is front and center, rightfully so. Last year, you heard Ricky Clark and I speak to the significance of learning how to take 2 sets of notes. Let me be clear, I was not encouraging us to code switch. Rather, I was encouraging us to acknowledge how our systems were forcing us to forget who we are and where we come from. One set of notes is to ace the test, and the other set is to tell the truth. I find myself with the platform and opportunity to do just that, speak my truth. My first presentation for NSBA and CUBE was a workshop titled Racial Consciousness for Educational Leaders. It called on educational leaders to strengthen their muscle on race. I want to frame this keynote with the same way I began my journey with CUBE. First, let's begin with acknowledging that race is a social construct. It is a human-made phenomenon. I have stated race isn't rocket science. It's harder than rocket science because we don't teach the subject in K-12 school systems. That, my friends, is by design. Most people do not know how to engage in courageous conversations. Part of the work includes establishing a common language and leaning into our own racial identity. Sue and Sue provided scholarly work around racial identities for white Americans. Atkinson, Morton, and Sue provided scholarly work for people of color. And Postone provided scholarly work for biracial, multiracial people. Each racial group was labeled with 5 stages. I'll give you all the quick versions to get to my conclusion. Stage 1s. My white brothers and sisters, stage 1s are dangerous. These are white people that believe people of color are inferior to white people. They believe and embrace colorblindness. They often say, I don't see color, and can do so out of unconscious or disconsciousness. Not all stage 1s have bad intentions, but their actions can definitely do more harm than good. Stage 1s have been coming out in droves the last 4 years. I'll just leave that right there for now. As for people of color, stage 1s prefer the dominant culture and its values over their own ethnic values. They may hold negative views of their own community. In my community, they may be the ones saying, I'm not one of those wetbacks. And in others, they are the people of color doing their best to disassociate themselves with their own community. Their lived racialized experiences are rooted in the false sense of assimilation and not acculturation. I reflect on educational leaders, including superintendents and school board members, that show signs of being stage 1s. They are SLEEP, S-L-E-E-P. I can see a direct connection to how they fund their educational efforts and how they justify achievement gaps. They, in essence, show they have a belief gap. They don't even believe students of color have the capacity to learn like other children. Stage 2s. Stage 2 white people and people of color are in dissonance. They begin to get signs that something is off in the matrix. Their levels of awareness begin to increase. For white people, they begin to recognize that not all people of color are one way. This is the dangerous part of generalizing. For people of color, they begin to notice they are not immune to the negative side effects of racism. Maybe their child was pulled over, and now they have no other explanation other than they were guilty of driving while black. Stage 2 educational leaders are now having to confront an ugly truth that race is pervasive. The impact COVID is having on disenfranchised communities is evident. The data is there. The Black Lives Matter movement didn't go away. People of color might have actually been pushing for reform for a legitimate reason. Colin Kaepernick was onto something real. Stage 3s. White people and people of color are different here. White people in stage 3, you get it. You know privilege and white fragility are real. You feel it, you know it in your heart that the systems surrounding students of color are not designed to benefit them. You also know white students have just as much to gain by learning from students of color and vice versa. You know that students of color do not lack capacity. They lack access and opportunity. The challenge for you may be feelings of guilt and or shame in knowing we have systemically failed our students by not allowing them to truly be connected to the educational system. You know students of color struggle to name 5 people that look like them, that have contributed to the making of this country. They can name 5 white people that made this country what it is, and they struggle to name 5 black, brown, Asian, indigenous, etc. We can't teach what we don't know, and we can't lead where we won't go. Stage 3 white educational leaders, you have work to do. First, thank you for leaning in and joining the fight. You also have the privilege to disengage and leave the fight. If you do, you go back to a stage 2. You may very well live the rest of your life and not have to lose much sleep. If you stayed engaged, though, you're headed to being an anti-racist and a co-conspirator. You have significant power that can accelerate the work. In Fort Worth, my white colleagues, majority white by the way, leaned in and made it possible for the passing of our racial and ethnic equity policy. They chose to open their minds and their hearts to better inform themselves of the toughest topic in our country, race. As a result, they have strengthened their muscle on race. We have since created an entire division of equity and excellence and funding it accordingly. After all, we pay for what we prioritize, right? For people of color, you are getting rooted. Stage 3 people of color know who they are and where they came from. The positives include knowing that there is a place in this world for you and your ancestors are relevant. My mentor said, you can't love the fruit if you don't love the root. This is an empowering stage. For me, Dr. Jose Angel Gutierrez of La Raza Unida Political Party set me on my academic journey of true liberation. I had the privilege of being able to return to my native land and learn about the Purupecha indigenous people. We are fishermen and intellects. We were never conquered by the Mexicas, i.e. the Aztecs. We did not fight them. We negotiated with them. It is here when I realized I come from a great people that have capacity. So when people came asking me to run for school board, I was reminded by my ancestors that I don't have to be a politician, and I already have the tools to be a great negotiator. The blood that runs through my veins is rich in family, community, and love for my people. See, knowing my history from a point of liberation was a game changer for me. It freed my mind and my soul to step into the wildest dreams my ancestors had of our bloodline. So, as I stand before you virtually, know that I lean into all that I am and believe children that look like me do not lack capacity. They do not belong in cages. They are not inferior. They are not criminals. They are not rapists. They are human beings being misguided in a social construct on purpose. As you can imagine, the negatives of stage 3 people of color may include high levels of consciousness shifting to blaming white people for the withholding of truth by the way of selective memory in our books. Stage 3 people of color may enter a space where they hate or despise most white people. I will caution you to acknowledge it and work through it. Stage 3 people of color, educational leaders, you scare the heck out of 45. You scare stage 1s. You also make stage 1 people of color uncomfortable. Stay the course. Push for policy changes. You are clear on the gaps in our system, so get to work. Stage 4s, white people, if you have chosen to stay the course and keep leaning in, then you have chosen to work through what it means to be a white person right here, right now. You will work through your guilt and or your shame. It is a crucial stage to reckon with your skin privilege and unearned advantages. Stage 4, white educational leaders, you will not give up because you want to get to a better place and truly understand how your whiteness shows up in your day-to-day life. You realize, as uncomfortable as you are, there are children even more uncomfortable than you. Stage 4 people of color, your thirst for knowing who you are and where you come from has been quenched. You are now entering the eclectic phase. Your belly is full of your people's history that you now want to go explore other people's cultures and racialized experiences. When I was rooted, I wanted to learn about Asians, Muslims, Jews, etc. because I knew who I was. I could now truly embrace other people's truths. I found I was less offended by other people's truths when I knew what my truth was. Stage 4 people of color, educational leaders, you have an opportunity to promote solidarity as you begin to live in it yourself. Your modeling of what it means to acculturate rather than assimilate can speak volumes to young people. Stage 5s, white people that stay engaged, lean into the racial consciousness journey, and work through their own whiteness end up in a beautiful stage. Stage 5 white people form an anti-racist identity and commit to being a co-conspirator. That means that they become like the white people that partnered with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and Yuri Kochiyama. Social justice becomes a real attainable goal. I love stage 5 white people. Stage 5 white educational leaders do woke work. They are the ones supporting and pushing for racial equity right now. They have been in the streets protesting or passing racial equity policies or calling out systemic racism publicly. If you are a stage 5 white person, you are not motivated by guilt. You are motivated by love and justice. Stage 5 people of color, you know who you are. You know where you come from. You have learned how to stop negotiating your value system. You don't code switch much these days and recognize it is possible to gain the benefits of the dominant society without having to negotiate your truth. I've always said, I want young people to see me navigate my hood, order tacos in my favorite Mexican taco joint, and watch me be the president of a large urban school district with nearly an $800 million budget. It is possible to function in the hood and in the boardroom. I have not forgotten my biracial, multiracial people. Pastone described a different set of stages. Let me note that these are frameworks. It is possible to be in different stages and move back and forth depending on your circumstances. Stage 1, biracial, multiracial people. Your identity is independent of your ethnic background. You may have lighter skin than one of your parents and or siblings. You may be able to pass for white. You have not had to deal much with being biracial or multiracial. Stage 1 educational leaders that are biracial, multiracial, your lens may come off as privileged. You may not be confronting the tough topics if you can pass for a white person. This is somewhat similar to stage 1 white people and people of color. Stage 2, you are pushed to choose one of your parents' ethnicities. It could be by way of an application for work, school, or etc. Your system may be going into shock as to why the forms do not have boxes that fit your identity. I have met people in this stage who use it to their advantage too. If they have a white parent and a black parent, they may choose their black parent's ethnicity when applying for a scholarship. They may choose their white parent's ethnicity when they are applying for a job. Stage 2 educational leaders, remember what it felt like for you when you first had to pick between your parents. Ask yourself why you had to choose and who designed this system of categories. Stage 3, your choosing of one ethnic group may push you towards self-hate, anger, and or shame. Picking one parent's racial identity over another can be traumatic. Stage 3 educational leaders, review the documents in your educational system that may be traumatizing biracial, multiracial students. What is the history of the racial categories? Why should the students adhere to the system? Stage 4, you begin to appreciate both or all of your racial identities. You embrace all cultures in your family and the blood that runs through your veins. So stage 4 educational leaders, create the space for biracial, multiracial students to appreciate all of their identities. They formulate policies and programs that encourage all appreciation. Stage 5 is integration. It is true liberation when a biracial, multiracial person can embrace all of themselves and their family's identities. In essence, they choose to no longer check boxes if it does not give them a category that encompasses all of their true self. Stage 5 educational leaders are game changers. They model a life of more than one identity where they can be their true self without negotiating any part of their family heritage. So what does this mean for us today? Just recently, the President of the United States forbid diversity trainings in federal agencies focusing on white privilege, critical race theory, and the origins of race. This is more evidence that key people with positional power in our country want to hide the counter-narratives of our real history and design of the country. I may sound like I don't like this country. It is the exact opposite. I love it so much, I have the audacity to call the BS out. What does it mean for you when you realize we have all been duped and manipulated? I'll leave you with some cookie crumbs in hopes you engage in the journey. Let's call it homework. 1, Google the origin of Caucasian. Look for 2 names, by the way, Johann Blumenbach and Christoph Meiners. 2, look up what George Washington's teeth were really made of: ivory, other substitutes, and slaves' teeth. Why were we taught that they were made out of wood? Ask yourself, why is this president adamant about eliminating educational and professional opportunities? What is the message our students are receiving when the leaders keep changing the rules for themselves, meaning little to no accountability? When funding continues to get cut as more children of color are a growing majority? And what they think of us if we are not forcing our own educational systems to change? What does it mean if the internet has better information than the materials we provide in a classroom or virtually? Let's be clear. This generation is accustomed to Googling to verify and finding their truth. They have learned how to take 2 sets of notes that include TikTok, YouTube, and other forms of social media. To me, it has been evident as they have taken to the streets this year, demanding change and demanding action. Let's make sure we are not operating with the CB mentality, meaning breaker, breaker, 1, 2, in the cell phone world. As the chair of CUBE, I am going to recognize this work is not easy, not rewarding, but it transforms lives. The haters will come. I have many of my own. Use their hateration for your elevation to be the light our children need you to be. My hopes is that we all hold each other accountable of providing receipts for positive social change. That means we use our positional and personal power to shift our school systems. We can do that by being clear of our roles, being the visionary leaders, establishing smart district goals, and working in collaboration with our superintendents to close achievement gaps. I wish you all the best and pray you are all safe during these trying times. This is your friend, Jacinto Ramos Jr.